This program is brought to you by Teachers College, Columbia University. Please visit us online at itunes.tc.columbia.edu.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second in this year's series of Equity Forums. I'm Michael Rebell. I'm the Executive Director of the Campaign for Educational Equity. And my job for today is to introduce our moderator, who will then introduce the panelists and begin the program. And I'd just like to say a couple of words about Tom Corcoran, who is resident at TC now in directing the Consortium for Policy Research and Education, known as CPRE. But previously, and in other hats he wears, I think, well, it's hard to say because each of these gentlemen has had such a long-standing, important role in Abbott. But Tom Corcoran probably goes back even further than David Sierra. He told me he was an original pro bono witness for the plaintiffs in the Abbott case. He was an advisor to Governor Florio in drafting what was known as the Quality Education Act, which was the main response that Governor Florio worked out to one of the court orders. Some people think that his integrity in responding directly to the court order had something to do with his not winning re-election, but it was a brave stance at the time. And Tom has continued his involvement in giving advice to Governor Corzine on the latest funding formula in New Jersey, which some members of the panel, I think, were not fully happy with. But maybe we'll hear a little more about that as the day progresses. Tom Corcoran.
Hi, I'm Tom Corcoran. I'm a retired combatant in the Abbott case. About every 5 years, I take an oath. I will not get involved in Abbott anymore. Anyway, the Abbott, literally, my career and the career of some of the gentlemen here at the table has been very much revolved around Abbott. I was in the State Department of Education in New Jersey in the 1970s when trying to implement an earlier school finance reform, which did not work, and then resigned from the department and among other things, did volunteer work for the Educational Law Center to help build the case that was filed and then eventually became the Abbott case. And as Michael said, served as a witness in that case. So my life has kind of revolved around Abbott for the last 28 years. And so has New Jersey educational policy. Anyway, we are fortunate today to have people with us who've been part of this drama and on different sides of it and can give you different perspectives on it. Our main speaker, David Sierra, is the Executive Director of the Educational Law Center, which filed the original case and has then fought through 20 different cases since then to try to both redefine what the Abbott decision meant and also protect that decision against various efforts to redefine it. And he's been David will talk about that experience, but I don't need to say a whole lot about David except to say that he's been a champion, a tireless champion really, for educational opportunity and social justice in New Jersey. And while he and I have not always been on the same sides of this issue, we both, I think, in the end, we both share the same goals. What we argue about are the means, not the goals. We have two respondents who also have been involved in this in different ways. Gordon McGinnis, who's now at the Century Foundation, was at one point the assistant commissioner in charge of the Abbott implementation in the New Jersey Department of Education, and led the effort by the department to try to, in fact, put the Abbott decision to good use and improve the quality of teaching and learning in the Abbott districts. Prior to that, he was a member of the New Jersey Senate and also the New Jersey General Assembly. So as a legislature, as a state policymaker, and as a public intellectual, Gordon has been involved with this case probably almost as long as I have, but maybe all the way back to the beginning. And so he will offer a somewhat, I think, different perspective about the case and how it's impacted schools and children and taxpayers in the state of New Jersey. Clifford Janey is the superintendent of the Newark schools and is a little newer to this set of debate, and so he may have a fresh view on it. But he has a perspective on it as the superintendent of one of the largest district in the state and one of the ones that's been heavily impacted by the Abbott decision and the ups and downs of Abbott over the last 28 years. So this case has a long history. It's a complicated set of issues, but they go right to the very heart, I think, of what the issues are that face the nation with respect to trying to close achievement gaps and create equal opportunity for all children in New Jersey and also the United States, which has been a major social goal in this country for a long time. So without any more, I'm going to turn this over to David and we'll get started.
Rather than stare at that red light, I'm going to go look at his. You can just put it right up. I'm not offended, I'm just.
Are you moving to the right or the left?
He's going to hold me responsible here. So, thank you, Tom. Tom and Gordon, who are friends and colleagues, and also with Dr. Janey, who's the new superintendent in Newark, whom I'm just beginning to know. And thank you for coming, Dr. Janey. I also have to say thanks to Dean Furman in the back. Susan, it's great to be here. Fellow traveler, longtime New Jersey resident, also very familiar with these struggles from her days. So thank you, Dean Furman, for having me and for hosting this event. It's an honor. And also thanks to Mike Rebell.
We promoted her to president recently.
Oh, is she? Okay, I'm sorry. Well, I'm a little behind on the times here. And I also have to say thanks to Mike Rebell for organizing this. Michael and I also go back and have worked collaboratively on a number of matters over the years involving school finance reform and the legal side of that here in New York, New Jersey, and across the country. So thank you, Michael, for having us. Let me say a few introductory words before I try to tackle this subject, which is a big one. I'm a lawyer. It's great to be here in the College of Education, but I approach my work with a great deal of humility because I've not taught in a school or run a district or been a principal. So I have to give that disclaimer. What I've tried to spend my time is with people who do and who know a lot about it, and in my efforts to seek to use the courts as a way to improve what I would call structural conditions for teaching and learning in schools, and to make the situation better for our teachers and our principals and staff and so forth and central office folks. And I want to put two issues aside. If you want to bring them up, I'm happy to, but they're a bit tiring. One is the money doesn't matter argument. Of course, money matters. That's why we spend a lot in high-powered suburban schools across the United States. And of course, money alone does not improve bump up test scores, or another way to say it is money is necessary but insufficient. The court itself in Abbott recognized this in the Abbot 4 decision when the court was talking about adopting the state's content standards as the substantive definition of a constitutional education in New Jersey. The court said that standards alone do not ensure any substantive level of achievement. Real improvement still depends on the sufficiency of educational resources, successful teaching, effective supervision, efficient administration, and a variety of other academic, environmental, and societal factors need to assure a sound education. So the court itself was very aware of its own limitations. Courts cannot order teachers to improve their practice, cannot order principals to do a better job, but it can affect the structural conditions affecting teaching and learning. And that's the second disclaimer or issue I'd like to sort of maybe put off to the side, which is the whole debate about endless debate about whether the court should be involved in this. Michael's written books about this. We deal with this all the time. On the legal side, I would just say that courts play a role, in my view, in vindicating the educational rights of children, particularly disadvantaged children, where their rights have been, where they've experienced a longstanding and deep violation of those rights. On the educational side, I would argue that courts, even if they don't get involved, they bow out or cut their tenure short, they still play an important role in getting the other branches to address structural deficiencies in our educational system. And that's really what I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about the cases, the 20 cases and 20 decisions. You can ask Michael about all that. So I'm not going to go through that. But what I want to talk about, and what Michael asked me to talk about, is the success of Abbott. And to talk about the success of Abbott, you have to talk about both inputs and outcomes. So really what I'm going to talk about, in the title of this presentation, is about beyond school by school. And the point of this is that what Abbott was trying to do was to force the legislative and executive branches to deal with the structural deficiencies, deep structural deficiencies in schools that served high concentrations of poor students in our state. So that's really what I'm going to try to do in a short period of time, set the table for Gordon and McGinnis and Dr. Janey to talk about it, talk about some more details, and create some space for them to come in as they wish. The Abbott framework is big, it's very broad and very deep. I know many faculty here worked on the Broader Boulder. Many of you know about that, the Broader Boulder campaign. Think of this, Abbott, as one example of trying to operationalize that kind of structural reform. That's what this is really about. So I hope you'll consider that. And I also hope you'll consider what I'm about to say in terms of the current debate about educational reform. And that's why I emphasize school by school, beyond school by school. A lot of the debate now is what do we do with schools? And this is about what I'm going to try, maybe you'll consider, about how we need to move beyond that, in my view, and start to talk about how we can get states, at the very least, to deal with the structural deficiencies in many of our states, in all of our states, I should say, across the country. So with that, I'm going to start, see if I can do this. This slide gives you the whole picture of inequity in New Jersey, and you could create this slide for any state in the nation. It would be framed differently. It might be rural districts. It might in the Deep South. And for example, in Mississippi, it might be the Delta or wherever it might be. But essentially, New Jersey has a deeply segregated public school system that happened after the Second World War. There's been a lot of books written about this. I'm not going to go into that. But what you have is, look at the concentrations of poverty in the Abbott districts. That's 31 districts that were covered by the court decree. High needs districts is a new emerging category in the law, which is 92 districts with 40% more student poverty and low performance on state assessments. And there are various other categories. So the interesting one is to compare the bottom to the bottom districts, the high wealth districts, to the top. So the bottom wealthiest districts in New Jersey serve about 4% of the state's student poverty. And look at that concentration. So this really tells you the challenge we face is how do you get improvement in districts which serve extraordinarily, and I don't think we emphasize this enough, extraordinarily high concentrations of student need. What do we do to deal with the students who are coming into those schools? And the second issue is what do we deal with the schools that have to address the tremendous amount of need that walks through the schoolhouse door every day? And this really illustrates the New Jersey version. Michael could put one up here for New York, I'm sure, of the problem that we face. Gary Orfield shows that New Jersey has the third most segregated public school system in the nation. We have tight municipal boundaries. So any attempt to deconcentrate high poverty schools through socioeconomic diversity or transfer is virtually at this juncture almost non-existent because of our tight municipal boundaries and the isolation and segregation within those boundaries. Now obviously this is de facto, since in Brown versus Board of Education outlawed de jure segregation. So The two big decisions in the Abbott case, which were the 96 and 97 decisions, Abbott 4 and Abbott 5, I would recommend them for anybody that's in education today. Teachers that are training, people doing doctorate work. They are wonderful decisions about policy and law and about what do we need to do to address structural reform in schools. And I'm going to really shorthand this because there's a lot of detail, but these are the big strands of structural reform that the court directed the state to implement, the legislative and administrative branches of the state to implement. One is adequately funded standards-based education, accepting our core content standards and assessment systems as the substantive definition of education. One thing I will mention that's important about this, we have content standards that the court has accepted, in 7 subject areas and so forth and so on. So it's not just about language, arts, and mathematics. It's about visual and performing arts. It's about health and physical education, science, and so forth. The second is well-planned, high-quality preschool. The court accepted our argument that kids in these communities that I just pointed out start out kindergarten a year and a half to 2 years to 2.5 years behind their suburban counterparts. And if we don't get them into high-quality programs, we're not going to get there. There was a direction for supplemental programs and reforms, kind of the kinds of things you would do for at-risk students, K-12. There was a direction to address the deplorable condition of school facilities in these communities, essentially because of the educational impediments and obstacles that created. And lastly, there was a lot of emphasis on trying to, let me say it this way. It's back to the quote that I talked about earlier. What the court tried to do was to say, this is not just about the amount of money, it's about the effective use of money in schools and in classrooms on programs and initiatives that are designed to improve the practice of teaching and ultimately to improve student outcomes. So this is a whole emphasis on trying to deal with not just funding amounts, but the effective use of funding. So, how did we do? So after 10 years of implementing this or more, where did we succeed in terms of the conditions, structural conditions, and then also I'll get at the end to outcomes. Let's talk about the structural conditions because that's what the court was concerned about. How about adequate funding? The answer is we have made more progress probably on this front because of Abbott than any other state. This is just one chart this is a data set that we're working on now, a national data set to gauge states on how equitable their school finance systems are. And this is a slide that just shows what we're calling the Acela region, which is New Jersey, Maryland, New York, and Delaware. And look at these lines. The downward slope means these are regressive states. If you're in a high poverty district, you get less resources than you're in a zero poverty district. And New Jersey goes, look at that slope upward. Shows progressivity, high degree of equity in terms of concentrated poverty. That's because of Abbott. There are only 3 really states that mirror this in the country. The other 2 are Massachusetts and Minnesota. And this chart shows you the dollars, to give you a sense of the dollars that have gone in under Abbott. So if you look at, this tracks a little bit of the segregation that I talked about, the prior chart. You have these slides, so you can look at these. The last is a weighted student amount per pupil under our new funding formula. We have a new funding formula that was put in effect and approved by the court about a year ago that has a weighted student enrollment, weighted for at-risk, weighted for ELL, weighted for, for those 2 things, and for students who are both. Look at the total amounts. That's why that line goes upward. So the Abbott districts are the 31 poorest districts covered by the court decree. They get $17,000 on average, but they actually still are spending below the wealthy districts when adjusted for student need. So when you actually adjust the spending in these districts for student need, they still are below the suburbs because they serve so many students in poverty. But this gives you a sense of the fact that what we've done, one of the big accomplishments of Abbott, is to sort of structurally reverse those lines, which you see in most other states, to make us a state that's progressive. That's critical because that's, this really delivers resources that are essential if we're going to get reform in high-poverty schools. Second big area was preschool. There's been a lot written about the Abbott preschool requirements. Abbott is the first court decision that essentially said public education starts at age 3 under our Constitution. All children 3 and 4-year-old are entitled, in these 31 communities, are entitled to attend preschool. The court had 2 other decisions which are also useful to read if you're in early education about quality standards. Eventually we came out with a whole set of quality standards from the court decree that are about class size of 15, teacher certification in early education, developmentally appropriate curriculum linked to the content standards in kindergarten through 12, so forth and so on. This is also a system that links, that does what we're going to have to do in the United States, which links child care, Head Start, and public schools in a unified system of early education in these communities. So this is not being delivered in public schools. Much of this is being delivered in child care centers and Head Start programs that have been upgraded and linked to the public education system in a uniform system of early education. And this is about how much we spend on this. It's an expensive program in the sense that it costs a lot for high quality. On average, it's around $11,000 per pupil. If you're in a public school classroom or child care center, it's an additional $7,000 on top of Head Start dollars to upgrade to get Head Start up. Just gives you a sense of how far Head Start programs under federal standards are below where we need to go in the United States. A little bit about results. Steve Barnett, my good friend at Rutgers at the National Institute for Early Education, has done a lot of work, and his colleagues, on evaluating this program. I'm going to present just 2 slides. This program, the good news about this program, there was structural evaluation, which we rarely do, put in to evaluate both program quality and outcomes, and you get a sense of the improvement of program quality over time. This is extraordinarily important if we're going to start to close those early development gaps. And this is a slide on outcomes. Gives you a sense of the progress in narrowing and closing or giving kids more vocabulary, print awareness, and so forth and so on. I could put a lot of these slides up. I just picked a couple to give you a sense. If you want this information, you can go to the NEAR website for a lot of the evaluations, program evaluations of the Abbott preschool program. This program is now considered the best in the United States. Our new funding law expands the Abbott preschool program to all high poverty districts. Another 84 high poverty districts are eligible. And it extends the same program to all low income kids beyond those high poverty districts. The question is whether this is going to be funded. And particularly because we have a governor who during the primary campaign said preschool was babysitting and got a lot of backlash for it. So we don't have a governor-elect who's not really committed to this. But if we actually implemented the law as it stands today, New Jersey would become the first state in the nation where every low-income kid and every child in a low-income community would be in a well-planned, high-quality early education program beginning at age 3. We've got a lot of work to do on that one. So the second big piece was how do we get the buildings in decent shape? Deplorable buildings and all that. And just to give you a sense, we implemented one of the biggest school construction programs. New Jersey was a state that prior to Abbott had no state capital program, like many other states. So all facilities improvements were left to local bond, which means you have to have the property tax base to fund school facilities improvements. So as is true all across the country, including the Corridor of Shame where President Obama went in South Carolina, these places cannot upgrade their facilities without deep state support. So Abbott is put in place a massive state construction program. These are some of the results. We're really now close up to 200 completed schools in our cities. Some of them are fantastic. So go look at them and hopefully you'll go teach in them. I should say about facilities. You know, there's a lot of talk about teacher equity. We've done some polling of teachers about what's important to them. We've closed in New Jersey because the funding gap is closed, the pay gap. So you can make as much in Summit Chatham, or Princeton as you can make in Newark. That's not the problem. But still, the issue of teacher equity rests on working conditions. And one of the big issues is facilities and space. And we have to, in this country, begin to start paying attention to that. I want to briefly talk about the Abbott Reform side, what I said previously about driving money to effective programming like preschool and other programs. There was a whole effort that was put in place in response to the court's directive to set up district-wide and school-based reform, elementary reform, which Gordon worked tirelessly on in his tenure in the department, and probably will say something about it. We were just beginning to start a secondary reform program, which is kind of up in the air at this point. There was a whole emphasis on supplemental programs, which is kind of the bolder, I know Richard Rothstein writes extensively about this. How do you connect schools to health care, social services, get those services into the schools or get the kids to those services? There was a lot put into that. There was district accountability for spending, district-wide budgeting. This went only so far and didn't go as far as it needed to go. And the last one I have to mention, which is the state ultimately being accountable. Part of the problem we have with the reform debate is that the states are responsible for the our systems of education, not local districts and schools. But the states do what they always do. They just throw off the responsibility, and actually the federal government now is complicit in this. They get the states off the hook because they say it's a school problem, it's a district problem. So what we tried to do was build in that the ultimate accountability for creating the structural conditions and holding people accountable at the local level rests with the state. That gets into issues of state education agency capacity, State Department of Education capacity. One of my pet peeves is about the complete undercapacity of our state education agencies. I know it's true in New Jersey, and I'm certain it's true across the United States, to handle the kind of substantive structural reforms that we have to have and that they're required to implement. So I'm almost done, and I want to talk a little bit about did it all make any difference? At the end of the day, did outcomes improve? Since that's what everybody's concerned about, and the truth is, we've started to make some real progress. And this has been noted by, there's a number of articles on this. Tom's old colleague and friend, Dr. Margaret Gertz at the University of Pennsylvania, has written some good articles on this. There have been other scholars who've started to look at this. And Linda Darling Hammond, in her book that's coming out very shortly, Flat World of Education, has a whole chapter on Abbott talking about the structural reforms and also the outcomes. So what you see is a narrowing of the gap at the fourth and eighth grade level. High school is still problematic because we never got around in Abbott to implementing the high school piece. And also on NAEP. We're one of the few states where the black-white achievement gap has closed. New Jersey has the highest graduation rate amongst blacks and among African-American males in the nation. Part of it has to do with this. Part of it also has to do with assessment policy too, which is not the topic for here today, but it has a lot to do. So when people tell you the Abbott drove a lot of money into the schools, what do we get out of it? The answer is a heck of a lot. Still a long way to go, but a heck of a lot. What's that?
Can you explain the 3 lines?
Oh.
Blue line, red line, and I don't know what they are.
Okay.
I mean, it's not important.
I think that's the white line on top for Nate. And
This is Nate.
bottom line
These
is
are
the
Nate's
black-
scores,
the
and
bottom
I.
line is the African American line.
Right.
And the numbers
White.
on the gap.
White,
African American, state average.
state average, okay, got it.
Sorry,
And that's all.
I'm not good at this. So
That's all reading, right?
yes, I could have put a lot of slides up. I just want to illustrate. These are for illustration purposes. And this is math. Again, we're not there, but man, that's pretty good. Okay, so what challenges do we have? I'm going to briefly talk about this. We have a new school funding law that replaced separate funding for the Abbott districts with a state funding formula. It's not a bad formula, actually. A lot of the money is still in the system. It didn't lower funding that much. It does create problems for districts over time. Dr. Janey's district is going to have a problem going forward, keeping the resource level that it has. It did drive a lot of funding into districts. Part of the problem we had with the Abbott decree was it only covered 31 districts, and there were a lot of other high-poverty districts. So it actually drives a lot of money out to districts with high concentrations of poverty that were shortchanged for a number of years, and that's important in terms of the whole equity picture in New Jersey. Preschool expansion I mentioned. The most troubling thing about the new formula is that the state uses it as an excuse to push aside the reform framework I talked about, which troubles me deeply. Not so much the money, but the reform policy framework for districts and schools is being pushed aside. We have a governor who's elect whose total education campaign for urban school reform was more charters and vouchers. Nothing about any of what I just talked about. The answer to, and focusing on a couple of districts where the performance under Abbott was the lowest, like Camden, Newark, a few others. Newark not the lowest, but Newark is a special case because it's Newark. Going to a couple of high-quality, high-performing charters, ignoring the rest of our charters. One other thing about New Jersey charters, we have an article on our website about this, is actually they, as a sector, most of them are in the districts covered by Abbott, and as a sector, they're among the lowest performing schools in the state, with a few exceptions. So now we're going to get more charters, is the answer. Nothing structural, school by school again. We have a big issue with high school redesign. This is the whole Achieve thing, and more high-stakes tests, more end-of-the-year courses. We'll see what the new governor does with that. And the last point I have to point out is the state capacity deficits are still deep and getting deeper. My concern about the budget crisis, it will further, we were just talking about this, further clear out any capacity, expertise, talent at the Department of Education, and leave it as a shell to try to deal with these things. And this is from Linda Darling Hammond. You have this, you can read it. This I guess this is from a blog post she did, but I guess it'll be part of her book. And it was actually a great honor to have Linda. I was with her on Friday and hear her speak about this and to talk about this, because she's somebody who people listen to, and to have her stand up and point to this, and to point to what's happened, given the negativity that's come out around this from the other side, was really an honor. And she emphasizes what I want to close with, which is about structural reform, structural improvements, and getting the state to deal with those structural improvements, not just a simple focus on schools and districts. And I'll stop there.
David and I agree. I agree with a lot with what David just said. But it's not that I agree so fully that I can't use this time. There's Abbott versus Burke is probably the most important judicial decision in education since Brown versus Board of Education, and it did two things which were terribly, terribly important. First, it provided adequate resources to the poorest districts in the state, thereby taking away the argument that the problem would always be that we don't have enough money. Secondly, it forced the state and the 31 districts to launch a high-quality preschool. Those two things together, I think, give Abbott its importance. However, I think that the other things that David talked about are not things that should be widely copied, and I'll tell you why. Departments of education deal in two verbs. The two verbs are shall and will. And they try to use these two verbs to affect what happens between teachers and students in a practice where the words shall and will are not going to work, because kids will not cooperate. They will not bring to school the preparation required in some cases. They will not bring to school the capacity to speak English in some cases. They'll bring special needs in other cases. Kids just don't cooperate with a view of the world that says, we know the answer to these problems, and we shall pick this answer off the shelf. We will consult scholars. We will deal with the textbook publishers. We'll deal with software people. But we, in the end, will decide that there is an answer to this problem. When, in fact, the people who are writing those regulations, the people who are writing these decisions, the people who are writing these laws in state legislatures, in Congress, in bureaucracies, do not know what to do. Otherwise, after 40 years of national conversation about the achievement gap, don't you think we would have made greater progress than we have? After 40 years of trying something called reform, reform after reform after reform, don't you think we would be closer to the goal of having poor kids have about the same life chance as middle-class and affluent kids have? They don't. We've made progress, and David pointed it out, we've made progress with young kids. Not enough progress, by the way. That gap is still, on a national level, substantial. In New Jersey, it's still substantial. But when you get to middle school, when you get to 8th grade results, when you get to high school, forget about it. This has been a huge failure. Why has it been a failure? Because when we go to make policy, when we go to set budgets, we ignore those things about which we are certain. And we hope that we can find something else in this vast array of proposals and proposed legislation and briefs and proposed regulations, that we will find something that will work. Neatly, simply, tidily. That's what we're looking for. We're Americans, after all, right? Went to Normandy, there were hedgehogs there, we took care of it. We welded on the hedgehog cutters onto our tanks, and we had a polio problem, and we asked Sabin and Salk to take care of it, and they took care of it. Damn it, and we can do this too. And it will be just as simple, and it won't. But here are the things we're certain about that we continue to ignore. One, the gap that we're talking about is created not at age 5 when kids show up for kindergarten, it's created before birth. Public schools are not able to do much about that. Public schools aren't able to do much about kids in their first 3 years of life. They are able to do something about it beginning at age 3, and they should, and they're not, by and large. The poverty gap has been measured millions of times. How many times has the kindergarten preparation, a test of some kind or another, been given to kids? There are millions of measurements that we have that this is a huge problem. It's a huge problem at age 5. And you're not going to solve it if you think that you can begin paying attention to it, as many superintendents of city districts think, in first grade. And if you're in a New Jersey district where you have the opportunity to provide high-quality preschool and connect it to what happens with kids in kindergarten, first and second grade, then you're morally obligated to do that, it seems to me. And yet, our experience is that out of the 31 districts, I'd say only about a third of them took that opportunity seriously, and that shows in the results. So here's what we're certain about. The gap is created by poverty. That gap can be closed with expensive, focused attention, beginning at age 3, continuing at age 4, and being connected to a program of intensive early literacy in reading, writing, and math in the primary grades. Because here's something else we're certain about. Kids who can't read can't be educated. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. Kids who can't read, they can see improvement in some of the things that they do, but they can't be educated, not well enough to be self-educated, not well enough to attend a rigorous 4-year university, that's our goal. Kids should have that chance. Can't happen. We know it must happen. That's the obligation of the public school system. If a public school system can't teach kids to read, then why do we think they're going to do such a great job on health and family structure and mental health and all the other things that go into all sorts of proposals for reform? They can't get reading right. And nobody argues with that as an obligation. Nobody argues with the truism. In order to be educated, you've got to be able to read. Third truism, reading is a skill you learn early. If you don't learn it early, you don't have much of a chance. If you're a 4th grader going on to 5th grade, you're reading below grade level, you have 1 in 11 chances of ever reading a grade level. You're 9 or 10 years old. It's pretty much over, because when you get into 5th, 6th, and 7th grade, those teachers don't think that their responsibility is to make up for what the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year grade teachers didn't do. And they're not equipped to do it, and they're not trained, and they're not supported in doing it. And they have a lot of other stuff that they've got to teach. So when we talk about middle school reform and we talk about high school reform of kids who are coming in 2 years behind, and we think that the middle schools and the high schools can make up for that gap, plus begin to teach them what's supposed to be increasingly rigorous material and content and skills, I don't understand what anybody's talking about when that is proposed. The fourth thing we know is that with all these difficulties described, and with this terrible gap that persists, although it may not be as wide in New Jersey as it is in most of the rest of the nation, the other thing that we know is that this is hard work. This is not work that requires a new reading series. This is not work that will be solved by software. This is not work that will be solved by having a charter school open down the street from the district school. It won't happen. This is work that must take place between students, their families, and teachers. It's got to be focused. It's got to be done in an atmosphere where teachers are supported mightily by the other people in the school and the people in the district. If we think we can go and solve this problem school by school, I just advise you, stay away from the Kool-Aid that people who advise that are drinking. It cannot be done school by school. We have now changed the rules, and the rules are the standards-based instruction. Well, you got 400 standards if you run an elementary school in New Jersey that you're responsible for. Are you really going to figure out what the science standard means for a 5th grade classroom in April on your own? And why would you do that? Because the school down the street is going to figure out something differently? Of course not. The district has to take the responsibility for that. And if you're teaching in a school that 20 years ago was entirely English speaking and now is 40%, geez, Mike, I'm driving them out quickly, including the president, including Mike. Oh, he's back. Phew. I don't know. We lost the president while you were gone, Mike. I'm sorry. I better wrap up. Did you say that, moderator? Or did you? Who said that?
It was David.
All right. I will wrap up. Abbott provides 30 districts with the opportunity to do things that will work. But they've got to extend the effort, and it has to be an intense effort. Without intensity of effort, what we're talking about, frankly, is bullshit. And that's what we've been talking about for 40 years in this country. And the responsibility for it cannot be transferred, God save us if it is, to the Department of Education. The culture of the Department of Education, I was there for 5.5 years. You could change it maybe, but the culture of the Department of Education is to write regulations and to enforce regulations, to make certain that people are complying with federal law in the receipt of federal funds. These are checklist people. These are compliance people. The idea that they would know how to work with a teacher who's teaching 8 kids recently arrived from rural Honduras or Guatemala or rural Mexico in their classroom is beyond, by the way, not only beyond their competence, it's beyond their interest, by and large. They are not there to improve education. They are there to write regulations. So unless we get a real upside down, and it can happen, and it's happened in some states, it hasn't happened in New Jersey for a while, unless we get the department turned upside down and get it away from this regulatory culture, the idea that it's going to provide people at the district level who need it. This is hard stuff. They need it. And in trying to provide it, I found that there are people who will take advantage of it, who are in leadership positions in the urban districts, and that there are more people who will not take advantage of it. And what do you do about that? That's enough, right, Tom?
Hi, good afternoon. I come to you by way of Boston, my hometown, from Roxbury, Orchard Park, and the Red Sox will be back. And the Patriots will rule. From Boston, I went to Rochester, New York, and I think one of our biggest achievements with respect to accountability was one of our labor contracts in which we came to an agreement that through peer review and peer assistance, if a teacher didn't find his or her way to some level of achievement and accomplishment, the peer review team finding in favor of the principal's review, that teacher would give up his or her right to the grievance arbitration process. That was big stuff. So it was not only all bets are off, it made principals do their work much more diligently. From DC, Washington, District of Columbia, our biggest achievement there had to do with setting forth the foundation and pathway for our students to be moving, not gradually, but significantly well on the NAEP assessments at 4th and 8th grade. So here's Newark. And listening to both David and Gordon, 2 things emerged in my mind sitting there. We did not take into consideration what our graduates should look like first, and then back map our way to pre-kindergarten. It's one of the biggest challenges and often mistakes that school districts in this country make. When I came to Newark last year, 53% of our graduates went on to Essex Community College, a community college, and spent 5 to 7 years to complete a 2-year program. So if we don't look at the risk ratios of our senior class, our junior class, our sophomore class, and do risk forecasting by grade level, by discipline, and then cascade our way down to elementary and preschool, we make the large mistake of making claims for which we celebrate on the way up to the mountain, but we slide back down the mountain because we haven't done the hard work first. My view is that you have to do the hard work first. I'm a big preschool advocate, but I would add that we need to do more than receptive vocabulary, and we need to do more in the world of expressive vocabulary for our 3- and 4-year-olds as they move up to become ready for kindergarten. So let me give you a picture of Newark in the context of Abbott. Abbott did some very good things with respect to setting the stage for even the funding formula that we currently have. If Abbott had not existed, there wouldn't be any basis for the funding formula to address particularly high needs students. It would have been a Las Vegas approach to budget reform. You know, anything goes. You just, oh, jacks are better to get into the game. that would have been the approach. And I think it did well by students in terms of pre-K. We have now 82% of our 3- and 4-year-old population involved in pre-K, which has gone up 10% the year before I came. But one of the things I would disagree with that's been shared this afternoon is that there are clear limits to structural reform executed by a court. A court cannot exact the fidelity of implementation of any of those reforms. And as Gordon indicated to you, nor can a state government, regardless of who's governor. You know, most governors are governing by ideology. They're always campaigning, they never stop, and they don't have the capacity nor really the will to actually shape how reform should take place within school districts. So when I came to Newark, it was clear that we had some good things that happened through Abbott, but it got mixed into the culture of Newark. That is, some of the FTEs, some of the positions, some of the tutorial positions, some of the at-risk support positions that were in the district got mixed up in a culture of entitlement to jobs. Because we had, prior to Cory Booker, we had mayors who saw the school district as an employment agency. And they got reelected on how many jobs they could get individuals. So we had clear reform titles for Abbott, but that got all mixed up in a culture of entitlement for which there wasn't standards of accountability with respect to performance by individuals. I also recognize that when I came to Newark, there was a standard for determining the graduation rate that I could not reconcile with substance. 80% of our students were graduating. I knew that not to be true. So I immediately adopted the National Governors Association's methodology, and the new percentage was 52%. Part of what we do has to be not a failure of what we represent by voice, but what we do by action. And all we have in public education is our name, is our reputation, not Janie, but the work that we do and the footprint that we leave is about the work that we do and how we do it. So that was very clear. There wasn't policies enacted by the school board that could support the structural reforms advocated by Abbott. There was a policy for attendance that allowed students to be absent 10% of the school year, and it was okay. There was a policy that said you could be out 18 days without an excuse, and it was okay. So these things mitigate against the work that's being done faithfully to execute decisions by a court, but you're not going to yield the kind of results unless you have a plan that makes the opportunity for all of the goals to become real. So that in year one, this is what you expect if one of your priority areas happens to be highly qualified and effective teachers. And what does that look like by grade level and by discipline, including the arts as a core? How does that play out all the way through? And if accountability becomes not a standard as much as it becomes a value, how does that express itself, taking what we did in Rochester and trying to superimpose it in Newark? And if the work that was done by Abbott by bringing schools and communities closer is more a value than just a standard, how do we measure the results of doing some of the work together? What are the high-performing relationships and the characteristics of the high-performing relationships between schools and communities? If I say to one of the principals, we're going to work with a number of agencies in this particular community for health reasons and social service reasons, how do I know, as I know what a good model classroom looks like instructionally, how will I know what that service should look like from this particular agency? See, we haven't gotten to that work yet, but that's the work that we need to get to so that when we talk about high standards and we talk about executing with fidelity, we know what it looks like first, and then we shoot for that target. And it isn't just within the domain of public education, although we are the bellwether for what society is going to be and what society ought to look like. So what we've done in Newark, we'll be releasing our strategic plan early next week, and we had 8 meetings with the Newark community, and you should try it one day. Newark is very special, very different, very proud to be part of the work going forward. We'll release it, and we will make good on what I talked about earlier, and that is what will college and job readiness look like for our high school students, and then how that marries downward to pre-K. That's how we have flipped the switch in Newark. So everything matters. When I do exit interviews with seniors, I ask them, what will it take for you to come back to Newark if you're going on to college? What will it take for you to come back to Newark? A, to live, obviously to work, and B, to raise a family and have those kids come to the public schools in Newark. That's the value proposition that we're arguing now to turn the city around. Because gone are the days when we are doing this work separate from that which is an agenda for the renaissance of a city. So we have to ask those questions. What do I need to do differently to give you confidence that you can raise your children in the city of Newark and raise those children in public education in Newark? So it has to do with the graduating class and each step towards the graduating class and how we frame our work in a culture of accountability, but together. So I would close, Gordon and David and others, and just make this point that as we go forward, we know too well that you can't take it off of a shelf. And one of the downsides of school-based reform was that it was shelf-driven. You had choices among whether I wanted this whole school reform approach or another whole school reform approach. But it was all school-based, and it was somewhat packaged. It didn't allow us to see what was good for individual students that reflected the school district by first grade all the way through 12th grade. It was so school concentrated, it reaffirmed Jersey as 600 communities, almost islands to themselves. Jersey is not unique, but it is so poised, even to this day, of being a set of villages and hamlets and municipalities, unlike other states that we were having this conversation earlier, unlike other states where you're not that different if you go to the mid-state or the downstate. Jersey, it's different. I tend not to want to get lost when I go downstate in New Jersey. Thank you very much.
The preceding program was brought to you by Teachers College, Columbia University. Please visit us online at itunes.tc.columbia.edu.